Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Joy Burkhardt with 2020 Mom. We're so glad to have Devorah with us today to be talking about her Bloom program as the winner of our Innovation and Community Solutions, or actually our honorable mention in our Innovation and Community Solutions program for the Innovation Awards. We're so glad to have you with us today, Devorah. And Stacey, we can go ahead and advance to the next slide, and you can see a picture of both of us here on the screen. Before we jump into introducing Devorah more officially, we'd like to take just a minute to ask who's on the line. And so you can use the question feature in your GoToWebinar control panel. And we just want to hear who you are. Give us your name, the city you're in, and then perhaps you can also let us know what you're excited about learning today from today's presentation. So your name and your city and anything else you want to share about why you're excited about today's presentation. And then Stacey, I'm going to have you let us know what kinds of questions or what kind of comments we're seeing in that question box. So again, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know where you are located and your name, and what you're excited about relative to maternal mental health and today's presentation, if you're willing. Use the question feature on your GoToWebinar control panel. And Stacey,
okay, I see.
Great, thank you.
Yep, I see Jacqueline Lay from Motherwise in Lake County, California. Interested in learning what others are doing to support moms and what she can do better. Thank you.
Any others that want to introduce themselves? We'd love to hear from you. Again, use the question feature to let us know that you're on. And there'll probably be a few more that roll in, but why don't we go ahead and introduce Devorah, and then we'll get started and take a moment to also let everyone else know who else is on the line. So great, I'm really pleased to have Devorah Enton with us today. She is a licensed clinical social worker based in the Philadelphia area. And Devorah, I'll have you introduce yourself just a little bit more here in a moment, but we know that you are the program director of the Bloom program, which we're going to hear about today. And you are a well-connected member of the Lower, and I think it's pronounced Merion community. So you'll tell us more about that. Thank you. Thank you in just a moment. And you've been building ties between the Jewish Family Children's Services Organization and local synagogues, day schools, families, and other community groups within your work. You are considered a thought leader who's changing the community's understanding and perceptions of mental health, which is so, I have goosebumps when I say that, and that you've really laid the groundwork for improving outcomes in maternal mental health and developing trusted relationships among the Jewish Orthodox women in Philadelphia. So we're pleased to have you, and I would love to just turn it over to you for a moment to share anything more about your background that you feel will be important as we start today's discussion.
Sure, thanks, Joy. Just making sure that you can hear me.
We can hear you. Welcome. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so it's such a privilege to be with you and with those of you who are joining us and those of you who will join us in the future to listen to this webinar. My background as a social worker has always been working within the Jewish and more specifically, typically the Orthodox Jewish community. For those of you who might not be familiar with what that even means, and depending on what part of the country you come from, it may not have enough context for you, and I can absolutely get to that a little bit later, but understand it as a fairly unique population of a very small and particularly insular community. It helps that I'm a member of that community. I was born and raised as an Orthodox Jewish woman, and therefore it helps to bridge some of those relationships. So my function within Jewish Family Children's Service here in Philadelphia is similar to the one that I held in Jewish Family and Children's Service in Arizona, where I lived for 9 years, where I built a program to engage the Orthodox community on all things mental health. I feel strongly about the idea that if we come to it from a perspective of education and awareness and collaboration and resource building, there's a greater likelihood of people reaching out and actually getting quality, qualified support that they need. And I can address a little bit more of what I mean by qualified later. So when we moved to Philly, thankfully, Jewish Family and Children's Service was as committed to this vision as I am, and I have been building this program called Ma'oz, which is to embrace the entire spectrum of behavioral health needs for the Jewish community, and then slowly growing, more intensely growing, the maternal mental health reach within the Jewish and the Orthodox community. So that brings me to my work today. I would say that the other thing that I think is important to know, even though it's not specific to Bloom, is my clinical expertise comes down very strongly in the community of perinatal loss. And I work very closely one-on-one in counseling and in consultation with women who have experienced infant death, fetal death. Typically, these are women that have experienced late-term losses, so stillbirth or even terminations due to fetal anomaly. So, and I moderate a phone support call for this group of women on a regular basis, typically every 3 weeks or so as a volunteer for an organization out of New York. And we have women that are joining us from across the country. The reason I bring that up is there's always this conversation about how do we reach the community? And I feel like this is just another way that we reach the community in a way that is supportive and culturally appropriate and sensitive to the issues of stigma in their own homes at 9 p.m. with full anonymity. But I think that this is just, I wanted to put that out there because I feel it's just another aspect of how we are touching the lives of women in a way that helps them get help.
It's so fantastic. Devorah, thank you so much for mentioning your work in perinatal loss. And we do want to share that work separately with our group. We can talk a little bit more about it today, of course, if people have questions, but do know that's really exciting and so critically important. And we want to lift that work up in some way as well. Devorah, we know that that's sort of separate from this award-winning program, but would love to get more information about those calls. And if women, it sounds like, can be invited to those calls every 3 weeks from across the U.S. And so such a great resource, and would love to promote that resource if we can later. So thank you for sharing that. Let me also share that what I recall is that you are married to a rabbi as well, and that you have 4 children. Is that right?
I do, and I am.
I do, and I am. Great. Well, it's always fun to start out with some of those details, especially around how many children you have. I think those of us that have 1 or 2 find that difficult enough. So bravo to you for juggling 4 kiddos and all this important work and being a wife as well, of course. So again, we're so glad you're with us. You did give us a little bit of an introduction to your move from Arizona, and you really developed a program there in your 9-year tenure in the Phoenix area over to Philadelphia. And I want to stop for just a minute and talk a minute about Philadelphia. And interestingly, a couple of our winners and several great programs we're seeing crop up out of Pennsylvania. So we last week featured the advocacy work that's happening in Pennsylvania around maternal mental health from another program award winner in advocacy. And just know that lots of great energy is there in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia. Anything you want to share about the community in general? It seems like we've heard at least one person say about Pittsburgh, and it feels to me maybe Philadelphia is a bit similar, is that it's big enough to make a difference and small enough to make an impact, something like that. Tell us about Pennsylvania and Philadelphia.
I love that concept. For me, this is big city life, having moved from Phoenix. But I think that what strikes me the most is that we are really at the heart of a huge education community. So a lot of research, a lot of trials, a lot of of the wisest of the world are here in Philly. And I think that the accessing that is actually we'll talk a bit about that a little bit as well. But I feel like there's this growing collaboration around what are the needs of the community of, let's say, specific to the women of the Philadelphia community. In terms of how it compares to Pittsburgh, I'm not familiar enough with Pittsburgh other than to know that they're building one of the very few, freestanding facilities for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders for women to come with their children. That's through the Stephen D. Achille Foundation and Allegheny Health Network. Yep. So I'm just beyond thrilled that we're kind of taking leadership in Pennsylvania in this way. Lots of work to be done, but we have some huge change makers that exist in Pennsylvania between Drexel and between Penn and the Postpartum Stress Center in terms of Karen Kleinman's work. That's all here. So it's wonderful to be part of that broader picture.
That's great, and I think a lot of folks may remember that Dr. Wisner, Catherine Wisner, who did the largest study on maternal mental health disorders to date, did that research that was published in 2006, just a few years ago, out of Pennsylvania as well. And so just a lot of leadership, as you said, Devorah, that's coming from Pennsylvania, in a state that we're just really excited to watch and support with all of the great activities that are happening. Well, good. That's helpful. I also do want to spend just a minute more. You talked a little bit about the Jewish Orthodox community and helping people to understand just a little bit about the community. But you also have mentioned in your application that the judges really, I think, picked up on and thought a little bit about how this community is not too different than other communities, perhaps women of color in certain ways, perhaps immigrant communities. And I'd love for you just Jewish Orthodox community. This you mentioned in your application there's just high expectations on mothers. Again, that sort of makes me think about our Latina communities, also in our Asian communities, perhaps, right? And that stigma is really amplified in your community. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So I think I just need to take it one minor step back and just kind of lay out for you a little bit about what it means to be Orthodox. So if you are unfamiliar with the Jewish culture or Jewish faith, so we have obviously different levels of observance as exist in any community and in any culture. So you might look at the Orthodox community as one of the most observant of the practices as they existed hundreds and thousands of years ago. More consistent to the way things were practiced, in Europe and in Russia and in the African areas. That's how the Orthodox community tends to practice today. Though today's Orthodox community is still more deeply integrated than they ever were in Europe, there is still a significant amount of integration, but not as much assimilation as you might identify in perhaps the Reform or conservative communities. Those are different identities that the community has created, these categories of faith practice. So, for example, somebody who might, so you might look at it as kind of a spectrum somewhere along the line to the left side of the spectrum. Again, to clarify, this is not politically left and right, but just a left of a spectrum would be Reform and then conservative and then Orthodox. And even within the Orthodox community, you also have the Hasidic or the H-A-S-I-D-I-C, depending on how you pronounce it. But the Hasidic community is still considered Orthodox, but have even a different level of observance within that category. Anytime you see an Orthodox Jew being displayed on the media, that meaning like on the movies and on television, they're always portrayed as Hasidic. My husband does not have, long curly sideburns, but we are still considered Orthodox and Orthodox affiliated. So just feel like that's important to clarify. The reason I think that's important to clarify is that we are dealing with a population that part of how you maintain a culture in a community, and this is for the sociologist to discuss, is by maintaining an insular practice and a community unto itself. So, for example, our children go to Jewish day schools. Our synagogue observance is something that's a daily and weekly occurrence rather than just on holidays. there's a very strong structure to the day, to the week, to the life of the Orthodox Jewish family. So now let's bring that down to an even more individualized level when we're dealing with a woman. Within that structure, even she may be a doctor, she may be a lawyer, she may be me, she may be a social worker, she may have high level of degrees. And there's also this understanding within the structure of her community. She wants, and I think that's a very important thing to underline, I have bought into this desire to have a large family, to be a member of my community in my practice, in my socialization. It's rare that I would ever really kind of hang out and socialize with people outside of the Orthodox world, because it's almost like they would be speaking a different language than me. So just to recognize that there is this insularity that comes with it, and that also can create a bit of a fishbowl effect. So what I do is because the people that I hang out with are the people that I go to synagogue with, are the people that I'm in day school with, are also the people that I kind of maybe a little bit more intimately aware of their lives. And then from a more reflective perspective is everybody wants to put on their best foot forward. Everybody wants to put the best show that I've got it all together, that my house is clean and neat, and I also have 4 or 5 children. It is not unheard of or uncommon within my community to have 5 to 8 children, and actually 4 would be considered on the smaller side and a smaller number. So now put on expectations plus communal responsibilities, because I cook Thanksgiving style dinner every Friday night and Saturday lunch. And because I keep kosher, I don't have very strong takeout options at all. And I'm typically now cooking for a large family. And then all of a sudden I'm dealing with the expectations, and I'm not all of a sudden, and I have another child, and I'm going to use the term falling apart. Who do I turn to say I need support? Who do I turn to say I'm falling apart, or I need help or support? So while I identify strongly within the Orthodox world, I do not see this as any different than in a devout Muslim community or in a small Asian population who comes from a certain area of community, where there is a deep and understood responsibility to the community. There's a deep and understood responsibility perhaps to family. There is also this strong sense, especially in the world of people with color, that I can't put my stuff out there because I might be judged. So just as just like a quick example, because this is my favorite example, is I'll have a woman who's had her 9th child, and after her 9th, she struggled with some severe postpartum anxiety, and then she went on to have her 10th, and she's struggling again. She said, I can't go to a therapist because the first thing they're going to say to me is, oh my God, you have 9 children, and why would you have a 10th if you had anxiety the first 9, after the 9th? So I had to work with her to get her through the door of a therapist that I knew could put aside our communal, kind of expectations or our assumptions in order for her to get the proper care that she needs. I think the same thing comes down to every one of these smaller niche populations. So if it is people of color, if it is the Asian community, it's the Muslim community, the Indian community, the Pakistani community, all of these communities, those that are deeply rooted in history, culture, faith practice, have also this sense of, I need to put on a good show, that everything's okay, that this is working for me. Because if I say that it's not working for me, it's almost disrespectful to the culture that I believe in and that I want to hold dear. So there's this risk of judgment. And so that's really the challenge of care, is how do I embrace needing help without risk of judgment for needing help, and being willing to put my stuff out there into the world, into the atmosphere, into the community, and being okay with receiving the help and not being afraid that I'm going to be judged because of it. Because I want to, if I see something that an Orthodox Jew is doing badly in public, I'm ashamed. I feel that because I hold communal responsibility. So even though I'm not doing something, that's inappropriate, if somebody else is, I see it as reflective on me. So I think the same thing comes back. That's our biggest challenge of stigma, and decreasing stigma is this ongoing, and I think will forever be an ongoing challenge that we need to address in our community. That was a very heavy, long-winded answer. I hope that's okay, Joy.
Well, if I could write fast enough, we would have pulled out some quotes for social media, but we will get back to those because it was very poignant and spot on. And I think, we'll see. We invite those of you listening now, use that question feature and let us know what you thought, because it's goosebump kinds of things that you're sharing with us. And so, you're very so well spoken, Devorah, of course, and also just to highlight how there are not very many differences between other cultures and communities, and this movement is really wanting and knowing that it's critically important to be culturally sensitive. And so, thank you for those wise words and inspiration. Let's just talk a little bit about sort of the bones of your program, and then later we'll move into how it got started around funding. I think we learned a little bit about your path from Arizona to Philly and finding a new home and wanting to bring the same dedication to mental health in the community generally. But let's just lay out what is the Bloom program. And from what I know, and want to hear this from you too, is there's really two core components. One is sort of this notion of peer support and peer educators, or having Bloom ambassadors, and this other component around outreach and working with faith leaders to understand mental health and maternal mental health, and also husbands. So outreach, peer support, and outreach is how I bucket the program. Tell us a little bit about. Let's start with peer support, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So the way that Bloom began is that we were looking at how can I access the women that are newly delivered. And as I just explained to you, there's a very strong premise of having babies all the time. So it is very very common in my community that there's a newborn. Almost weekly, we will have 2 to 3, pretty much every week we'll have 2 to 3 new babies that are born into the Orthodox community just in Philadelphia. What's lovely, just by the way, is there's always a meal train that is immediately started that the new mom and family gets 2 to 3 weeks of meals provided by the community as a way of kind of easing her transition home. So we wanted to kind of piggyback on that concept of how would we reach the women that every woman who has a baby gets a meal train, and that's therefore has destigmatized the idea of needing help or wanting help. And for any woman who's had a baby, that after that idea of coming home and serving food to our children can be really exhausting, or even just to me, serving food to me. I remember when there was a point where for several weeks my older child went to school with mismatched socks, and I knew that I was doing better when the socks finally matched. It's chaotic. So I needed to figure out a way that I can provide connections for these women and information into their hands without it feeling like I am picking them out of a crowd. And that was actually I'll talk a little bit later about the collaboration with the rabbis and with the community leadership, that was their number one concern was, well, women are going to feel like they've been, kind of called on the carpet for maybe their kids had mismatched socks, and therefore they're being called out for maybe having postpartum depression. So we were very conscious of how are we going to embrace the entire community in a way that was less stigmatizing and more and engage them in a way that was comfortable. So the Bloom program, as it started about 2 years ago, was funded by the Women of Vision from the Jewish Philadelphia Federation, the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia. They have a women's division that funds different kinds of women's programming, and we were super thankful to get from them a grant, a $35,000 grant to start the program. And what we did was we said every woman who has a baby that is affiliated, even if it's a name only, to an Orthodox community, is identified, and we want to deliver to her a bag, a Bloom bag. And in the Bloom bag, there would be swag for the mom. So moms get lots of stuff from the hospital for the baby. We wanted to focus on the moms. And the funding partially went to buy and create 100 Bloom bags. And we said, we're going to just deliver them until we're done. We wanted to make sure that the women who were delivering these Bloom bags were trained. And this is where the Bloom ambassador, and I think this is really the key of this program. The Bloom ambassadors are really peer support. These are women who went through about 14 hours of training to discuss all things postpartum. And these were not therapists. These were community people, just women who said, I love this idea. I want to participate. They were trained we brought in specialists that discussed issues of postpartum nutrition for the mom, pelvic floor disorders postpartum for the mom, some issues of sexual dysfunction that women might struggle with postpartum. We brought in a therapist from in a partnership with Drexel Mother-Baby Connection Program, Drexel University, who came in and talked about some of the motherhood identity challenges that women go through, that transition from being a wife to a mom, or a mother of one to a mother of two, or from being single to being married and now having a new baby, and some of the challenges that women identify, as well as in the relationship that they may have with their partner. We brought in a clinician from the Postpartum Stress Center, from Karen Kleiman's group, who spoke very detailed and in specifics about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, what that looks like, really understanding what some of the clinical symptoms might be that they might see when they would drop off and spend some time with the mom, drop off the bloom bag and spend some time with the mother. And then we did some more training on how to have compassionate, listening, focused conversations. So as you probably would anticipate, many of the moms would be very quick to jump in with their story rather than listening to the newly delivered mother give her story. And so we wanted to work with these women and how to be more supportive listeners. So that was the ambassadors, and then we would have them deliver the bags to the new mothers with the hope and the intent that the mother will now be connected and able to access this woman as a peer support. So the peer supporter said, would you like to chat? Anything on your mind? If you're unavailable, I'm going to check in with you in about a week. And the goal being that they would now have a connection to someone who wasn't necessarily a friend, but someone who kind of seems knowledgeable and knows about that it's hard sometimes in the postpartum weeks and months, and then obviously to be able to connect them to resources. So the second piece of that, the first part was the bag, second part was the delivery and training of the ambassadors. The third part of that was cultivating resources in the community that I felt confident and comfortable in referring to. So I can't send a typical Orthodox woman to a typical non-observant pelvic floor therapist, because there's a lot of pieces in the Orthodox religious practice related to marriage and menstruation and together times and separate times from their spouses that you need to be mindful of when working with a woman and her spouse potentially, or with a woman and her and the challenges that she might be experiencing with pelvic floor disorders. So I needed to have an education seminar with the pelvic floor therapist, and I did a workshop with them, teaching them kind of similar to what I'm teaching you, but in a much different way, about working with the Orthodox community. So I then cultivated these resources that I could very comfortably and in a trusted way, first of all, have the resources and be able to do a warm handoff when somebody identified as needing additional supports. And we did that for all different kinds of care, between, lactation consultants and pelvic floor therapists, private therapists who specialize in PMADs, and also physicians that we felt who could address any of the urogynecological challenges that women can potentially experience from birth trauma. So that's the core of Bloom. What came out of that, though, is what Joy mentioned about addressing the dads. So the women kept saying, the women ambassadors were saying, how come nobody ever taught my husband this information? And why aren't the dads aware of this kind of stuff? Because they can typically actually be our first responders. They're the ones who have no idea what they're seeing. So we originally said we were going to do a webinar, and the mom said, no, let's do this in person. So we did an event called Husbands, Hormones, and Heroes. I served beer and sushi, and I publicized that I was serving alcohol. And I hired a therapist to come in, and I actually didn't hire him. He volunteered his time. And he came in and spoke to the father. He called it What Your Wife Would Like You to Understand About the Postpartum Weeks. And we had about 15 men in the room, and it was, I promise you, they could have gone on for another hour and a half. We stopped it in an hour and a half, and it was such an empowering hour and a half for them to be very open about some of their struggles with their wives. They were surprisingly vulnerable, and it's something that I hope can, in the future, get funding to do again. So that was the husband's piece. one more piece that I want to add on is that we felt that we wanted to bring the moms into the building because we have built a beautiful building that has a very dynamic environment with like an art studio and a therapy spaces and a children's den full of children's toys. And now every other week we have been running a mom chat. And the Bloom Mom Chats are a facilitated workshop for about an hour where moms come with their babies, the kids are playing, and the mothers are sitting on the side. I typically print out like an article that maybe can spark conversation or discussion. And the mothers have created this comfortable, chatty, relaxed experience for them. And if I tell you that they are being so brutally honest and so open, it's magnificent. And we have moms that are saying things like, I'm yelling at my kids and I don't know how to stop, or I really have no time for myself, or I feel like I'm finally in a space that is non-judgmental of me. So that's how the program grew from a service-oriented perspective. And then, Joy, if I can go right into the way of how we built collaborations with the leadership, but if you want, I can sit with just we can stop here in terms of the service component of Bloom.
Yeah, let's stop for just a moment. I'm going to do a somewhat of a recap. You correct me if I get anything wrong. And then I think we actually will stop and just open it up for some questions before we get into leadership, and then talk a little bit more about funding later. So if you have questions all about these service components of the program Bloom, feel free to include them now. And then we'll talk a little bit about funding and sustainability, that kind of thing, in just a moment. So what I heard you talk about was, really this initial grant helped you create these drop-off mom swag bags, right? Thanks for Mom.
Yes.
And develop this ambassador program that could drop off the bags, to have a casual chat with the mom to let them know that it is a hard time. They got trained in how to listen to mom's stories, and then could be a link back to support in a safe way if needed. And from there, the program seemed to grow. You knew too that you had to cultivate resources in the community so that when you did get a call back to an ambassador, and then ultimately back to you from someone that was perhaps suffering from a mental health disorder or really struggling, that you could find some therapists who are ready to support the community, the women in your community. I also heard you talk a little bit about, what we would call the outreach to fathers, and sort of the beer and sushi night that was 1.5 hours long, and that, maybe some of this will be done more on an ongoing basis. So I'd love for you to talk about that and the work with dads, and if that's something that you think you'll continue. I think you said if there was more funding, you might continue that work. And then, one thing that I'd love for you to touch on before we open it up for questions is tell us a little bit more about, in terms of those two buckets, peer support and then outreach. We talked about outreach to dads. Talk to us a little bit about, if you don't mind, the outreach to rabbis and the faith community, and what that looked like.
Absolutely. So we approached it in two ways. I approached it with the rabbis. I also approached it with the rabbis' wives. So what I did was, some of the rabbis' wives have like formal leadership responsibilities in the community, and we call them the rebbitzin, but some of them did not. Some of them have their own, professional careers, etc. But I understood that no matter what, when a woman is struggling, it is possible, not always, but it is possible that she will come to her faith leader's wife to consult, to share, or also just as frequent, somebody else from the community will call the rabbi's wife and will say, I'm really concerned about Sarah. She's really, I'm going to keep using that term, falling apart, because that tends to be the word that I hear all the time. She's really having a hard time. She's falling apart. I'm really concerned about what I see. I'm calling you. So, I wanted the rabbis' wives to understand, first of all, what is a more clinical thing that we're looking at versus just like the chaos of having a new baby. And I felt like it was important for them to be a little bit more savvy about what are some symptoms they might be missing. So I reached out to them and asked them to come in for breakfast, and I served the breakfast as a part of the grant, and I did a quick workshop with them, about an hour at the most. Really rapid fire review of what are perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, what is the terminology. I talked a lot about things like intrusive thinking and the OCD tendencies, because I tend to see a lot more of the anxiety and the OCD behaviors in my community for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And helping them understand what that might look like. So I'm going to get very specific here to the Orthodox community, because I do believe that when you're dealing with the faith community, you need to understand the nuances of that community in order to properly understand how the symptomology can present. So for those of you who are working with an Asian community or maybe a small religious Indian community, you have to think about what it might look like in that community. So for my example, in the Orthodox world, when after a woman has her period, so there's a time period where we separate from our spouses. It doesn't mean that we don't live together. We're in the same house, we're in the same room, but we don't touch. There's no touch. And then there's a transitional space where we go to a ritual bath, dunk in the ritual bath, and then resume relations with our spouses. So for as long as the woman is not bleeding, so for example, she's nursing and she's not getting her period, we don't have to deal with those issues. And if she's pregnant, we usually don't have to deal with those issues. But anytime a woman is menstruating, there's this on and off again cycle between husband and wife. Okay, that's like the brief overview. What that means, though, when it comes to OCD behaviors is, and this is part of our conversation that we had with the rabbis as well, is that what might present is the woman might become very concerned that she may have not immersed properly, that her preparation time for going to the mikvah or the ritual bath is taking her hours, that she's ruminating on the fear that she got it wrong. It can develop into a little bit of a ritualistic, we call it scrupulosity, where there's a ritual component to the OCD behavior. And as well as the intrusive thinking, that intrusive may really focus heavily on religious implications of these behaviors or of intrusive thought. So that religious overlay might come across as pious. It might come across as she's so careful in the way that she wants to observe this law. And, she's just taking it to, she's super anxious, but like it's kind of almost lovely that she is so devoted to keeping this religious practice in its entirety. And what I needed the rabbinic community to be more alert to, and they're growing in their knowledge of this, and also the rabbis' wives, was how this might present in postpartum dunking, in the postpartum dip in the ritual bath, and how that would typically take place 4 to 6 weeks postpartum, and that just might be when we're seeing a heightening of the symptoms. So to be alert to a woman who's calling them 3, 4, 7 times the week before she's supposed to go to the ritual bath and asking and re-asking and rechecking and checking again, is this a presentation of postpartum OCD, or is this a presentation of pious practice? So that was kind of how I approached the rabbis and the rabbis' wives in order to help engage them in understanding some of the deeper nuances of these disorders. I also engaged them before we even started. So before I even applied for this grant, I needed to make sure my faith leaders were on board. And I met in person with every one of them, including their wives, because I needed their buy-in before I could even try to get it funded or sell it to the community. And I think that's one of the most critical pieces here in terms of collaboration. If you come at them as an expert, they may just totally reject you, even though I'm a member of the community. If you're not a member of the community, I would guarantee you almost a 90% rejection rate. Okay, I would say without their buy-in, I probably would have had a 50% rejection rate, or I would have had to work really hard to cover myself to get back into their good graces or into their trusted graces. So in order to embrace a nuanced community, you have to have a champion from within the community if you are yourself not one of them. You have to have a champion who will help kind of smooth the connections between you and the leadership. And it comes from a place of, I want us to work together, not I have a really good idea. And so I might say that, this program can help you because it's going to give you another number to call and to refer to let you get back to your religious work rather than your pastoral work that's absorbing, 70% of your time. So I did the pre-work and then I did the post-work education. That was part of the collaboration and the connection building before I could even launch the program.
Such a great point. And regardless of the types of programs we're all doing in our own communities, just that pre-work and relationship building is critical. So such a great point. Well, good. Let's take a pause then and ask our listeners today if they have questions on either of those two categories, how that peer support program was developed and rolled out, or this outreach component to both fathers and the rabbis and rabbis' wives that we heard Devorah talk about. So Stacey, I'm going to just pause and we'll have you open your line and let us know if there's any questions that have come in.
Yep, Devorah, I just see a question. Can you repeat the name of the husband's piece that you talked about earlier?
Sure. We called it Husbands, Hormones, and Heroes.
The H's. And you served sushi and beer,
yes.
which I think probably any would appreciate.
So what was interesting, I'll tell you just a very funny nuance, is that the therapist who spoke, who was amazing, a really amazing, super cool guy, he popped the beer top too, and he was drinking with the guys. So in retrospect, we were kind of wondering I'm not sure about the ethical implications of that, but boy, did it neutralize the field. It neutralized the authority figure in the room and made him much more trusted with the men. So while, every agency and every organization should probably have their own, kind of give that a moment of pause and thought, having a male therapist pop a beer top with the guys that he was, and remember, these were not his clients, so this wasn't a therapy group, this was a workshop, so it was a little different, but it was really a fun, interesting, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall, but I wasn't invited. I was just watching through the glass.
Great, that's fun, and it's great that you got to watch through the glass, right? Well, good. I think the work that you're doing is really fantastic and, again, can translate to so many communities. Stacey, let me just make sure there wasn't any other questions that came in now. We'll also talk about funding and sustainability and then have another opportunity for questions to come in later.
That was it so far.
Okay, great. Devorah, before we do move into funding again, can you just reiterate the type of training you provided to your peers? I think you said it was 14 hours. You talked about listening and I think some of the clinical components. Did you use any kind of standardized peer support modules? And I don't think these really exist much in our community yet, but just curious if you did.
We did not, because I wanted them to, really my goal was about really giving them the knowledge to walk out into the community more educated. It wasn't exclusively, we look at them kind of in retrospect as peer supporters, and they really were working as facilitators for peer, but they weren't running groups or anything like that. So no, we did not use any identified model. I wanted them more knowledgeable as people out in the community to be able to comfortably hang out with other women and chat about these topics. So this is another facet to the collaboration piece. So the way that I was able to do this in a fairly inexpensive way within the grant dollars was that some of the people did this for me for free, and some of them did it for me for very, very low honorariums. So the Postpartum Stress Center, as I keep mentioning, they were intrigued by the work that we're doing and were excited to collaborate with us. And they provided us Hillary Waller to speak at a very reduced price. And she came out multiple times to talk about perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, and then a more facilitated workshop on listening. I had a nutritionist who specializes in nutrition for moms and babies, and she came out and talked about the nutritional needs of women postpartum and how to help them kind of find good, healthy calories when their minutes available to them to work are very, very small. So that was that was another person that we had come in. We had somebody who was a local pelvic floor therapist, and she came and did a workshop for us for free. So she also saw it as an opportunity to kind of potentially expand her business. I know she got referrals from this, just from the women in the room and from others that we sent to her. So we saw it as like, I could kind of sell it as a collaboration. And ultimately, there was definitely referrals that went in their direction. So they saw it as almost like a little bit of a business opportunity. And I've referred comfortably to every one of them, the nutritionist, the lactation consultants, et cetera. So to look at it as not exclusively about how much do I have to raise in order to pay for these kind of workshops, I looked at it as who are my local community resources who believe in what I'm trying to accomplish and who are willing to put, good faith into a program that is time limited. It's not like I was asking them to collaborate with me for the rest of the year. It was several hours worth of their time. And they were willing to do it. Some of them were really willing to do it pro bono or at significantly reduced cost. So when we look at collaborations, especially again in small community, people will see it as people really do see this as if they like the idea, they buy into it, they're willing to donate some of their time. And I think that they were excited to be part of something that was a little bit new, a little dynamic, and a little different. So it was nutrition, it was pelvic floor disorders, it was relationships, it was the motherhood identity, it was PMADs and communication with other mothers about challenging issues. I think
great. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that clarification. Sure. Excellent. Let's move into the funding component then, and sort of how you are. I think those on the line often we all are, and those of us in nonprofit settings. I think some of you may not be on the line, but most of you, I suspect, are in some sort of a nonprofit setting. We know how difficult it can be to get a grant, number one, but then to sustain programs once that grant funding ends. And so you did talk a little bit about the initial grant that you had applied for. I think you said it was $35,000. Is that right? Because that's a lot.
That's correct.
Money.
Yep.
And fantastic. Mm-hmm. And how long did that cover the program for? And then are you still in that period? Or are you outside of that period now? And how are you sustaining the program? Or plan to?
Sure. So we are outside that period. We actually are about a year out. We were able to. So a lot of that was a very time-limited program. Like the Bloom swag bags are complete. So we have a few left, but most of them have been distributed. And I don't right now have the capacity to replenish those Bloom bags or to redo the training again in the future. However, this past year, we have been working on cultivating some new donors and new potential donors that could hopefully replenish the pot, but more importantly, to expand the program. Because what this did was it created chatter in the community about perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and we want to grow our offerings within an agency on maternal mental health. So one of the things that makes us unique here in Philly is that JFCS just built this magnificent building. It's the first of its kind in Philly, that's for sure, where it's a therapeutic space, but it feels like a country club. And it is a building that has an art studio, it has this children's den, it has a magnificent teaching kitchen that will make every person who likes to cook jealous. It has a huge community room, and all these unique and small and support room, group room spaces. What this has helped us do is we don't have to rent anything. So all I need to do is created some of my peer supporters have become moderators as volunteers working within the building during these events. So what I've done is I've just said, we're just scheduling these mom chats. We are bringing the moms in the building. It doesn't really cost me much. It costs me about like $25 in cookies, cookies and coffee for every other week. And I just wrote that into my general funding request for this year, even as a nonprofit. I said, this is part of what I want Ma'oz to be doing. And bringing the people into the building and creating this space for them to come every other week with their kids. It is moderated, like I said, by a volunteer, so I can actually focus my energies during that hour and a half on something else. I don't have to be in the room, and I just oversee that volunteer. one of the things that is done because of the money that was associated with this award is that I've used that money to pay for more hours from one of my peer supporters who actually was very instrumental in coming up with this Bloom idea 2.5 years ago, and have her do more coordination of programming within the building relating to moms. So she's the one who is arranging activities that kind of can get tacked on to the mom chat. So that we just had one, and there's another one scheduled, a mom's morning with an art therapist in the studio of who I was, who am I, who do I believe I should be, and who am I becoming? And we did an 1.5-hour workshop with the mother, and this facilitated with an art therapist. So she helped to coordinate that program, pull it together in the building for the mothers, and it was very, very low cost in order to make it happen. The money that we used that we got from 2020 Mom was to help because I had other responsibilities beyond maternal mental health. It was to help facilitate additional programming within the building for as long as the funding is sustained. Right now, we are in another grant cycle where we have just submitted another 2 grants and are cultivating certain relationships with certain unnamed donors that we are hoping will champion the cause for our agency. Our agency is very deeply donor-driven. We have many, many grants as well, but we have a culture of donor-driven programming, and this has now been identified within JFCS as something that we believe strongly in and we want to fund. So now our development team is looking to how do we find the dollars to create something like this into the building, and it really is going to affect change out in the community.
That's great. Extremely helpful. And then remind us your position. It sounds like this is really a core component of your work. Was your position already funded full-time through the program before the grant was written?
Good question. So no, my position is considered an unfunded or an underfunded program. So position within Jewish Family Children's Service, just in terms of our structure, if you're driven by a grant, like a specific grant that you are hired to run and to implement, then you're considered a funded program. Mine was identified as an unfunded program because they identified the Orthodox community as a population that they really wanted to embrace and engage. Just like actually just before I was hired, they hired an individual who was going to focus on the LGBTQ needs of the Jewish community and beyond. So the agency, in being a very dynamic and forward thinking, we're looking at what populations are we not touching in the community around us, not just Jewish, but just broader. But the Orthodox population was one of those. And so they hired me to engage with the Orthodox community on many issues of mental health. So one of my other grants, having nothing to do with maternal mental health, just by example, which just helps pays my salary, and hopefully do good work in the community, is a grant that I have on sexual abuse prevention. And that helps to fund some of my hours that works within the day schools and the synagogues to create safe spaces for our children. So it's not exclusive to maternal mental health, and we're always looking for what programs and what grants will help fund the work that I would like to be doing.
Got it. So a bit of a patchwork, like so many folks are used to, I think, on the line, and sort of maintaining the good work from grant-funded programs over time. All of them, right?
Correct.
When they come and go.
Right.
Very good. No, that's helpful clarification. I think what we'll do now is go ahead and pause to see if there are any other questions. We have generally scheduled the webinars for an hour and a half, but find an hour and sometimes just a couple minutes over work out perfectly. So let's just pause, Stacey, and see if any other questions have come in. And those on the line, if you do have any additional questions, feel free to ask them now. We will be uploading to the 2020 Mom website a program overview, a written overview, along with this recorded session. So those of you that would love to just kind of wrap your brain around all these great things that Devorah is doing and think about how you can scale all or parts of these programs in your own community or programs, more materials will be available. And Devorah, I suspect and know that you are open to receiving questions after today's session as well. So Stacey, why don't we make a note to include Devorah's email in our emails that go out in a couple of days with the recorded session, and also a link back to our website for these materials. We'll include Devorah's email there. Then why don't we go ahead and pause, and Stacey, turn it over to you to see if there are any other questions that came in.
Nope, nothing yet.
Okay, great. Well, Devorah, we're going to give you the last word. And, if you could leave us with sort of final thoughts, maybe first about communities and different community needs, and then anything else you want to share. And I'm ready. I have my pen ready because I think you're going to say something beautiful that we want to quote on social media.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, the pressure's on.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. For me, it comes down to the more I understand the community that I'm trying to serve, and I come to it from a place of strength and opportunity, I will have a much greater chance of serving that community well and of affecting change. But I need to be cautious, because I don't need to affect change on the things that work within my paradigm of what a woman or a mother or a community should look like. I can affect change within the context of what works for her. So the woman that has that 9 children and wants that 10th, I need to work with her on having that 10th child in a healthy, supported, and safe way. If a woman says to me, I want to grow my family even though I have mental illness, my job is to help make sure that she has the resources to make that happen. And I think that that's really the ultimate cultural competency of any community we work with, is coming to it from what are the strengths of this community that I need to harness, who are the change makers and the leaders within the community that will collaborate and work with me, and what are the ways that I can help hold up a woman and strengthen her capacity to function in the way that she wants to function in her community. And to me, I think these are all doable in every one of the communities that we can serve and that we can connect with. It's doable. You have to have the passion, you have to have the access, and you have to have the respect that these communities deserve. Even if they feel different than you, even if that there are practices within that community that might feel antiquated, that might feel maybe even male-driven. Or dare I say, what's the word I'm looking for? But the male-dominating, which is typically the complaint and the concern. Work with what you have, see the strength, make change, and give them something, great to believe in, and I think that you will see good results. Is that okay?
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel like I'm going to turn some of this into a great blog post. We may tap you to do that too, Devorah. Thank you.
With pleasure.
Great.
With pleasure.
We'll go ahead and conclude today. And just again, another heartfelt congratulations on receiving the honorable mention award in the Community Solutions Program category for our Innovation Awards in Maternal Mental Health. Well deserved. Such great work, and I know we're going to continue to work with you in many ways, Devorah, to tap.
Thank you, Joy. And I want to just thank you. And I just want to take just one moment of pause to thank you for the work that you are doing. I love seeing you and Facebook and your posts and your passion. And there's change afoot, and it's global. And I admire and respect you from afar in what you bring to this picture. And it inspires me, it inspires others. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart as a therapist for holding that torch for us to follow and to lead with you. And you should just continue to have the strength to do it, and the passion to do it, and the energy to do it, and those that will follow and lead by your side. I thank you.
Well, that's so sweet. And, our goal, just one last comment, is to make sure we're lifting up best practices and inspiring change. That's all it's about. And you're doing that. Yes. You're helping us to be able to lift up the work you're doing and others too, and inspire and not reinvent the wheel, right? Learn from each other. So thank you for those sweet words. And again, we'll go ahead and conclude today. All of you who are listening to the recording or watching live, stay connected. We'll be launching a learning network together this summer, and want to invite you to join us, where we'll get to hear more from programs like Devorah's in a great community where we have chat boards and file sharing, and really just want to extend these opportunities to learn together. So with that, we'll go ahead and conclude, and be on the lookout for our email with the recording link and more information about Devorah's program on Monday. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Stacy. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.